Hello everybody, my name's Saraya Cortaville and I'm a portrait photographer. Thank you very much for joining me today. Hopefully you'll join me for what will be an interesting and inspiring next half an hour to 40 minutes. So today what I'm going to speak to you about is hopefully give you an insight into my last 20 years as a children's portrait photographer and give you those little tips and tricks that I've learned along the way that help me to produce some engaging and natural and emotive children's portrait photography. We're going to touch on how I plan a little bit beforehand, how that helps me when I actually arrive to the shoot, and how I tend to run a shoot from start to finish. I'll also tell you what I'm looking for in that shoot to produce some beautiful and engaging images. And I'm also going to run through a little bit about some kit and also some techniques that I use, which will hopefully help you set yourself apart from the general public just taking images with their iPhones. So to start off with, what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of information about myself and how I kind of got into this wonderful career that is dealing with children and taking their portraits. So to begin with, I was a graphic designer. I started out in Reading doing a typography and graphic design degree. I did that for 4 years. In my third year, I got pregnant with my beautiful daughter, Rosie. Managed to finish my degree out of some pure miracle. And then I decided that graphic design probably wasn't really the career for me. So decided that I was going to be a mum for the next 4 years. And then, as most mums do, as soon as those children head off to school, you kind of think, what am I going to do? My reaction was pretty much the same, and remembered that I'd really enjoyed the module during my degree when I'd picked up a Pentax K1000 film camera, and I'd really enjoyed that process of taking portraits and just learning how to use the camera in the first place. Realised that I knew this much about a camera, so I went back to do an A-level at my local evening college, which was great. I learned an awful lot. We did processing and dark rooms and things like all the magical stuff with photography. I then by chance picked up a BJP, which, if any of you old school photographers know, British Journal of Photography, and there was a tiny little advert saying, oh, we're looking for an assistant in our commercial studio. And me being hugely naive in the photographic industry at that time, decided, oh, why not, I'll just apply. Who knows? I managed to miraculously again get this job, and was an assistant in an amazing commercial studio for the next 2 years. In North London, we had 5 different studios, and most of the time I found myself migrating towards the studios where there were kids involved, and the photographers at that time as well also needed me on board because I was helping out in those shoots. Generally, the females were a lot less intimidating, and at the end of my 2-year kind of tenureship there, the photographers said to me, actually, Saraya, you are a natural with children. And it seemed to be that was the progression that my career was going to take. I then got a job in a family portrait studio, a fairly large portrait studio. We were extremely busy. We were running 2 studios. I worked my way up to senior photographer and ended up with 2 or 3 photographers working with me. And it was my job then to inspire them and kind of help them on their photographic, 'photographic journey, as somebody else had done with me before. I then I then got my own studio in North London after working in that studio for 6 years. I worked in my own studio for 6 years, and then it was my daughter's turn to head off to university, hopefully not get pregnant, and start off on her own journey. I then decided it was time for me to take a break and went travelling and lived in some amazing different countries. And I then, when I returned, decided that actually I didn't want the burden of having again. So now I do all of my work on location and wherever my families take me, which is really exciting. And I'm very lucky enough that I'm very good with my clients, that my clients have kind of taken that journey with me from the start. So over those 20 years of me being a photographer, I have really pushed myself creatively, and I think for me that's been hugely important in the growth of my career. And I would urge all of you, if you have the capacity and the ability to do that, to do so, because it really did push me into really understanding myself as a photographer. I've got a couple of fellowships. I think there's only a few females in this country that have got such an accolade. My first fellowship was in studio portraiture, which I'm hugely proud of. My second fellowship was in social documentary, which was when I was travelling. I did a project over in Eastern Africa, I should know that, Eastern Africa, in Tanzania, where I lived for 4 months. So I did a project over there, which I got my second fellowship for. I won London Portrait Photographer of the Year in 2009. I've written a book on portrait photography, if you're at all interested. And I think it's really important for me to constantly push myself creatively. I feel myself when I get into those ruts that I need to be doing something else. COVID's been complete revelation for me because I've not been able to do anything like that. So I've had to adapt and learn how to do things completely differently. Luckily for me, I'm a very well-known mentor and judge in the photographic industry. So that has brought work in for me, which has been great. And also doing things like this, which is hugely interesting, but a massive learning curve for me. So hopefully this goes okay, otherwise it's going to look a little bit silly. So yes, after doing all of those things, really my point of all of that was that my greatest achievement really is the fact that I give my clients what I believe are unique, natural, expressionful, I don't even know if that's a word, but hey, let's go with it, and emotive and just joyous images of their children. As a judge, I have very recently seen a lot of very staged, styled portraits of children, and as beautiful as they are, for me, they don't feel particularly representative of those children. They're not very emotive. They just are not very childlike. And I feel that's what I want to represent in my work. So what I'm going to do next is give you my top tips of how to capture natural, emotive and energetic and childlike portraits of children. And I think for the beginning part of it, what I want to do is say to you, my tip 1 is to find your you as a photographer. And what I mean by that is try and find what you love and what you want to represent as a portrait photographer. That's really important, I think. So when I said that, as a judge, I see a lot of portrait images of children and they're all very staged and they're all very styled. That's wonderful for those kinds of portrait photographers. That's their niche and they're hugely talented at it. And it's a really massive skill. For me, that's not my thing. My thing is I want to try to capture the essence of the child that is in front of my lens. And so when I say to you, find you in your portrait photography, who inspires you and who really floats your boat? If you're looking at an image, who do you find, oh, I get that person? You need to find that. And for me, I think my two people that inspire me are clearly my daughter. This is her. This is Rosie. And this is probably one of the first images that I took on that Pentax K1000. Just after my degree, actually, and we were in Covent Garden, actually. And my tutor at the time at my A-level said, oh, how did you find it getting on the floor in the middle of, oh no, actually it was Leicester Square, sorry. Leicester Square. How did you find getting it on the floor in the middle of Leicester Square? And I just said, oh, it just felt right, because I wanted to see her face. I wanted it to be an engaging portrait, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because I think that that's really quite important to my style of children's portraiture. The next person that really inspires me is Eve Arnold. I love the way she just keeps it real, and everything that she shoots is reality. And for me, that's how we should be represented, not some kind of fake, idealistic version of ourselves. And if you need any inspiration, if you're on the kind of same mindset as me, then this book is beautiful. There are images of Marilyn Monroe and complete ordinary people, but everything in here, I believe, is truly real and emotional. And if you sit and observe the images, there's a real connection. But then there's also a real distance, which I think is also really important in portrait photography. We as photographers don't have too much of an influence on that reaction that we're getting back. We need some, because we need to make that reaction, but we don't need too much. I hope that all makes sense so far. So when I'm going into the shoot, what my initial thought process is I need to make friends with this child, because ultimately I specialise in children under the age of 13, 14. So for me, I need to engage with that child as soon as I possibly can, because I know as soon as I engage, I make that child relaxed, and I can see it in their body language. And that is half the battle, I think, with portrait photography, is we need to meet that connection as soon as we possibly can. Most of portrait photography actually is not about what's behind the camera and the shutter speed and the ISO and the f-stop. That's a bit. But I believe that 90% of what we do as portrait photographers is that communication and allowing that person to be them and drawing that out of them. It is, you know, you hear lots of photographers saying, oh, it's a collaboration, it's a this, it's a there. Each photographer needs to work in their own parameters, in my mind, and this is mine. You might agree with it, you might not. This works for me, and my clients keep coming back because they will say to me on a viewing or on a virtual viewing, you've captured that, the essence of my child, and that to me is the biggest accolade that I could get. So my next tip is the engage and communicate. And to do that, first off, I pretend I'm Father Christmas. So, and I mean, when I say that, I get to know the child's name and age before they've even turned up. And sometimes it's really funny because the child will look up at me and say, how do you know my name? And I say, I'm Father Christmas's best friend. Especially if it's kind of an autumn time shoot, that's always quite awesome. So yeah, I always get to know the age and the names, and more often than not, it's because I need to know that information beforehand, because I need to plan in my mind what kind of poses I'm going to be doing, how I'm going to communicate and engage with this person. Obviously, if I'm dealing with a 2-year-old, it's going to be extremely different to how I'm going to deal with a 13-year-old. And so if I'm prepared for that, that's really going to help me. And what I'm trying to do foremost is to break down a barrier. We need to be able to communicate really, really quickly. Most of my shoots are only an hour to an hour and a half. So I need to break down that barrier as quickly as I possibly can. And so if I've got smaller children, I will get down to their level. I will say hello. Obviously at the moment we can't touch each other, or normally I would shake hands or give a high five. Or we aren't able to do that. So we have to keep distances and things like that. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I'm pretty good at eye contact and smiling and, you know, keeping kids on side. I think what I'm going to have to be careful of is actually not having that contact, because kids, once they get engaged with you, generally want to come and sit on your lap, they want to hold your hand. And I think at the moment, obviously, we've got to be hugely aware that that can't happen. So getting down to their level is a really big one, and also talking, playing, taking time. You are more likely then to make relaxed and natural smiles. What we don't ever do is say, "Can you smile?" That's a real no-no for me. I never say that. And when people come and watch me shoot, if I've got mentees that come and watch me shoot or students that watch me shoot, they always say it's like they didn't even see me say anything. It is just like it's a walk in the park. And that's what I want my clients to feel like. We've had a really nice hour and a half together. We've walked around the park. I might have taken some pictures, but that's not the focus, excuse the pun, that's not the focus of what we have been doing. We've had a good time just getting to know each other. And for me, that engagement and communication is absolute key to what we do as photographers. And I will try and do that as quickly as I possibly can. I just need to make friends really super fast. But the next tip really is also, we've got to be as patient as we possibly can, but we also need to work fast. So impatient, I mean, we have children that are going to fall into it straight away. You're also going to have kids that are clinging on to mummy's leg or hiding behind mummy's coattails, and we've got to be, that's absolutely fine. If I've got the latter, I'm going to need to work an awful lot faster than I have to with the one in the front. So we've just got to adapt and be mindful that each child is completely different. And there are quite often a few little tips and tricks that you can do if you've got a completely shy one. It's almost sometimes it's almost ignoring, because then they want to be noticed. Sometimes it's getting down again on their level and saying, you know, shall we have a little game of something? Should we play sometimes I'll take a ball with me and we'll play a bit of catch. Sometimes it may well be that I'll just sit down on a bench and we'll just ask some questions. It's just finding that little sweet spot of getting in and finding what is going to bring them out of themselves. But like I say, I never pose, I never ask them to smile at me. It should really just be a natural and a why don't we? Why don't we do this? Shall we try this? Shall we try that? There's never you need to do this, you need to do that. It's always a very slow and very considered method of the way that I will lead this shoot. Because otherwise what you end up getting is forced and unnatural and tense kids, because they know, and especially if you say to a child, can you smile to me? There are certain ages where they'll just kind of go, because it's not natural. It's not natural for them to just say smile. It's not natural. If somebody turned around to me and said smile, I'd probably do exactly the same. So you need to get those techniques up and heightened. And most often than not, it's chatting and it's eye contact. So if you can work on those skills, trust me, your portraits will become more and more natural and easier. You might get very wonky portraits because quite often I'm looking over the camera and I tend to, for some reason, do this. If you shoot looser, as I'm going to advise you to do later, you can certainly crop in and straighten it out. But the most important thing for me is that engagement and eye contact that you get with your clients, because then the parents are going to enjoy those portraits even more. They're far more natural. The kids look relaxed. It's an absolute no-brainer. And with that communication, you need to be able to, as photographers, be able to read how that client, that child is feeling in that environment. And you need to be able to run the shoot, if you like. It's almost a story. You need to build it or drop it, or build it or drop it, by the fact that that's how their mood is taking them. So if at the beginning of the shoot the child's really energetic, you might say, great, let's kick some of this out and let's go for a run, and Mummy's told me you're really good, you're a really fast runner, why don't you run to tree number 3 and then run back, or why don't you do a really big spin because you've got an amazing dress on, and get rid of some of that energy because they're really excited. And then you can do maybe some, more pensive, more quiet portraits, and then maybe you build it back up again. But my point is you need to end on that high, so that at the end of that shoot, those kids and those parents want to go away and be, wow, that was really, really cool. She was loads of fun. I've had a load of good times and can't wait to see those images. And that's what you want to leave them with. Obviously, things go wrong with children. We're dealing with the unpredictable, and it can be a little bit hard because as photographers, we want to get the shot. We're under pressure. Why isn't this child behaving the way I want it to? My advice to you is totally stay calm. I have learned over the years that actually getting agitated is going to get you absolutely nowhere. Staying calm will get you everywhere and will gain the respect from the parents, because they're like, how on earth do you have the patience? I like the how do you work with children and pets? I get there, oh my God, you are so patient, pretty much after every shoot, especially with under 5s, because I keep it in. I mean, afterwards, different story perhaps, but during that shoot, I am cool as, and oh, it's fine, don't worry, to the parents especially, because actually the kids don't care. It's the parents that are going to be stressing out. Why is he not behaving like this? Why is he doing it today? Oh, we should have done this wrong. And then the kid reads into it, and yeah, you've lost your shoot there and then. So just say to the parents, it's absolutely fine. This is how we deal with this. And my point is that generally, if your child is being a little bit tricky, in the nicest terms, just ignore it. And focus either on parents, if it's an only child. If there are 2 children, focus on the other child. Soon that tricky child comes around, and trust me, they will be really well behaved. More often than not, actually, I get parents coming to me saying, oh, you're going to have trouble with this one. And the way you deal with them, it's normally the other child that's the other way around. So Parents think they know their children, and to be fair, we underestimate children. So just be mindful of that. There's always a way of turning it around. But my biggest advice to you would be ignore tricky behaviour and acknowledge positive behaviour, and more often than not it will turn it around for you very, very quickly, because you're the stranger. It's almost like kids very rarely misbehave at school because they only see their teacher as a positive role model. And I'm not saying parents aren't, but kids know how to deal with us, right? So yeah, and as I said, reassure the parents that this is all very normal, and they will still, if you've had a tricky bit of a shoot, they will still go away with, oh, thank God that's over, but it was still really good and can't wait to see the images. So yeah, you know, I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you get a tricky child, it's all going to be fine. Your parents will respect you even more for dealing with it in a controlled and calm way. And it's also the next bit really is take control. We as photographers need to take control. Sometimes I'm sure you'll get, if you're especially on a location shoot, which I've had lots of times over the years, is a parent will say, oh, I know the best place for you to shoot because it's so beautiful and it's so amazing. And you get there and you think, oh my gosh, light's awful, it's not actually that a great location, not really sure what I can do there. Tell them. You are the professional at the end of the day, and be brave and be bold and say, and explain why. And normally I say, the light's awful and the reason why is, I don't like this because I can't get this. And this is what I'm trying to get from your children. Your children are either unsafe, the light's wrong. You need to be the controller of this shoot, and the parents will respect that. And if they don't, they're not the right clients for you. Hand them the camera and say, do it yourself. But which I have seen before in a commercial shoot, trust me. A commercial shoot and an art director, that happened once. Art director didn't know what to do. So I'm not saying be that aggressive with your clients, obviously not. But you know, it's the point is we are the professionals. They're paying us to do the shoot. So respect. When I'm telling you it's not right, and these are the reasons why. My next tip is to get down to the level of the child. Now, we spoke about this at the beginning, kind of, you know, getting down to their level to engage and communicate with them, which I think is really important. But it's also really important when you're actually taking the images, because it, first off, is hugely less intimidating for them as children, so they feel empowered, and of course we want to make our children feel empowered. The next point also is an image-wise thing, is we want this image to be engaging, and being at eye level is far more engaging for the viewer. So for my next tip, obviously us as portrait photographers, we are ultimately, whether in the studio or on location, we're looking for good light. Obviously in the studio, you've got complete control of what you're doing, and your lighting setup can be set up for different scenarios. That's fantastic. It's the reason why I moved out of the studio, if I'm honest. I got a little bit bored and a little bit stuck in the same rut, if you like. Don't get me wrong, I still do studio stuff now, but my real passion is guys and kids out in the natural world, because for me it's a huge challenge. I love that challenge of finding the good light, and it's always changing. I've had a nightmare trying to shoot this today because I've not got studio lights in my studio at the moment. I've got all natural light, and I've got two huge windows, and it's changing all of the time. So trying to get something consistent for this film has been pretty tricky, but there we go. It's a challenge, and we've all got to love a challenge. So with the good light thing, I love the fact that it's always changing. It's always going to be different, and one location at 5 to 2 could be completely different at 20 past. And it's having that ability to be able to work around that and think on our feet and adapt, which I think makes life way more interesting. And the ability to adapt, I think at the moment, is completely key. We need to be able to think on our feet and think, okay, this isn't going to work in this kind of environment. How do we get over it? And getting over those stumbling blocks and hurdles is when you achieve them, it's brilliant. So finding good light is absolutely great. And what I generally tend to do is, if I'm arriving at a shoot, I'll do it, like I said, 15 minutes beforehand. Where is the light right now? Okay, I'd normally shoot there. It's not quite right now. Maybe it might be okay in half an hour. So let's turn things around and let's shift it and adapt to the situation and find out how that's going to work today. It may not work at all. And like I said, if the client says, well, I've seen this shoot that you did before and I'd love it again, just explain to them it's not going to work today. Or it's not going to work because, you know, if people are told and they have expectations, and you can kind of tell them why and just say, trust me, it's going to look awful. If they don't believe you, still take a picture and say, there you go. It's this is why. And me as a photographer, I wouldn't want my work going out like that. Makes you look more the professional than a failure in my mind. Sometimes we, especially when we are starting out as photographers, we so want to please and say we can do everything, and actually we can't. Most of the people that I mentor, when they first send me work, they will send me, my stipulation is they send me 30 to 50 images and we have an hour to talk through them, and most of them send me bits of everything, which is great. However, I then send them a form saying, okay, there are certain questions that I need to know about you. And they always tell me their passions. They always tell me what they want to really shoot, and they'll show me a little bit of that. And ultimately, that's what I want to see, because that's the bit of the photography that you really love. And when people show me an awful lot of themselves, they don't really know what they want as photographers. They need me to tell them this is what you need to do. And it's the same with portrait photography. It's, you kind of want to really hone in on your style. And like I said about my inspirations before, I'm not going to give my clients a load of different styles. What I'm going to do is give them some black and white, some colour, but it's all come from me. They all know a Saraya portrait once they've seen it. All my black and whites are really consistent, all my colours are really consistent, all my skin tones are really consistent. And that will be consistency from 10 years ago to now, because I found what my style is. And so my lighting is exactly the same. If it's not going to be right, it's not going to be right. I'm not going to go out there and say that it is going to be right. So I take control. This is what I'm really good at. Trust me. And trust me that I'm going to still take, even though that image that you may have seen on my website that we're still taking in the same location, it's not going to work right now, but I'm still going to take you some absolutely amazing images. In fact, they might even be better. And it's just about a confidence thing. You just need to be confident in what you're doing and sticking to the style that you love and that represents you. So be confident in that. Choosing the right time of day, I think we may have touched on this a little bit earlier, but I normally do all of my shoots in the morning. Mostly because I've got the most energy. And if I'm dealing with children, that's what I want to be. I want to be at my most energetic, because you meet 4 5-year-olds or a 1, a 2, a 4 and a 5-year-old on a Sunday morning. It's better than meeting them on a Sunday afternoon. For me, my energy levels are way higher. Also, you've got more chance of them having had a grumpy time, missed a sleep, loads of row with a sibling. If you get them at the beginning of the day, you're more likely to get them in a good light and in good spirits, full of energy. So if you've got children in any portrait shoot, I would suggest you do this in the morning. Point is location, location, location. So most of the time, it's the first thing I will discuss with my client. And I try as much as I possibly can to make it as personal to the client as I can. So it needs to, my stipulations are, it needs to be near them. So what I don't want them to do is be traveling 2 hours to get there because they think it's an amazing location. It needs to be local to them, or they need to stay over there the night before if it's that an amazing location. I don't want those kids to be sat in a car for ages and get to me sweaty, grumpy, and not that happy. So that's one from me, but their location needs to be really personal to them. It needs to be personal to them because ultimately then it makes the images more and more personal to them as a family and them as children. If those kids are comfortable being in that location, wonderful. If they love spending time there as a family, even more wonderful. So it's things like that I will advise the clients, you know, is it a really special place to you? I've had shoots at St Thomas's, outside St Thomas's Hospital, because their younger brother died there. Obviously that's hugely personal. I've had shoots at Waterloo train station because the little boy absolutely loved trains, and we had a toy train set, if you can believe it. With this day and age of health and safety, I had a kids train set on Waterloo train station, and the conductors and everybody loved it. It's really worth thinking and educating your clients as to how personal these shoots should be. You know, ask them questions. Where do you go as a family? What do you do as a family? What are your family really interested in? And then you start to learn and make it far more personal to them, and you're more likely to get so many more unique shots because of it. Not only are you challenged, but you get, and let's not beat around the bush, I've been some incredible locations because I've suggested this to my clients. So location's really important, and getting something different to the next one is always going to be good for your clients. Going to the studio is brilliant. But if you are charging premium rate, I believe you should be giving your clients a more personal and individual service. So doing something like this and saying, do you know what? Do you have any suggestions on where should we go? Is really a good starting place. Having said that, the local park or a local strip of graffiti. If they walk to school that way, I'm completely up for it. As long as it's interesting, I'm totally up for anything. What I will do is get there before they do. If I've not been there before, I scout around, look for where I want to shoot. They can tell me where they may want to shoot, but I will always know exactly where I want. And what I try to do is a loop. So we'll start off with the meeting place. It may well be that I've suggested it, they've suggested it, but I'll start off with a meeting place. And it's nearly more often where I've parked the car, and I'll do a loop. And I will have figured out 8 to 10 locations where I can feasibly do a beautifully lit portrait, and I will stop at each one. So that's my criteria of a good location, and hopefully I'm experienced enough now to be able to work with most locations. Sometimes I turn up and I think, oh goodness me, what have I got? But I can generally turn it around. There'll be some little beautifully lit archway or nook or cranny or something of bit, like I say, bit of graffiti or something that I can generally work with. So don't be too disheartened sometimes if you turn up and you think, eek. If you've got a little bit of vision and a little bit of know-how as to how you can edit, and black and white sometimes can make the best out of a bad location. It can bring out things and make the children the feature of that portrait without you having to do too much work. So on the day, another tip is I generally try to not to meet, unless I'm doing a portrait in their back garden or in their garden, is I don't try and meet the clients in their house. And the reason for that is, as much as I try and make things really personal and unique to that family, so they quite often want to get to know me, I'll come in and have a cup of coffee. What it means is I'm there for an hour sometimes without actually getting any images done, by which time my energy levels have gone down. I've psyched myself up in the car on the way there, and then I get there and actually we're not ready to go. Okay, I'll sit and have a drink, and that's not how I like to work. I like to work in that fact that I get there, right, let's start as soon as we can. I'll obviously get working with the children, and that's really interesting, and getting to know them and making friends. But I need that momentum to be kept up, and if that's not, and I'm waiting for one kid to get out of their pajamas, one to have breakfast, everything then goes back in time. So I would advise you not to do that. Sometimes obviously it's inevitable, but yes, most of the time it's harder work if you meet them at their home, because just getting them out is the process in itself. So I hope you've all found those tips nice and useful. Thank you very much for joining me for the last 40 or so minutes. What I'm going to do now is show you a little slideshow of my work, and in the meantime, if you would like to forward through some questions, that would be wonderful. If you would like to see some more of my work, please go to www.sarayacortaville.co.uk and have a look through my website. Look forward to hearing from you. Thanks very much. Bye.